Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Hultgren. I am the Director of Social Media and Content Marketing for the MLive Media Group. Thank you so much for joining our event, Trending Now, Cannabis Industry Insights, MLive's first ever cannabis webinar, and we've got an amazing program for you today. The collection of humans that we have, I am so excited to share with you. Conversations with key industry leaders who are going to provide you with valuable and actionable insights for all of you who are already involved in the cannabis industry and those of you who are looking to enter the industry. So a couple housekeeping notes. We're going to have a Q&A section after each panelist. And so at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's the box that you see in the slide. You can leave your questions in there. That way we can keep track and answer them either live or type an answer and keep track of all of the questions that you have as we go through the afternoon. Also, there's a chat function that if you've been on one of these 1,100 Zoom webinars in the last 8 months, you are aware of. But the tricky part about Zoom is that it defaults to panelists. And so you got to make sure you switch from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. And that way you guys can converse with one another. I already see a bunch of you already doing that. So before we get going, and I'm excited to do that, I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Select. Their goal was to create a better cannabis oil cartridge. In particular, they wanted a cartridge that would be safer, smoother, less harsh, and would give the consumer a better overall experience than other devices on the market. You're going to hear a lot more from them and their story as we hear from Select's Director of Operations, Chris Ramos. I want to thank as well our gold sponsors, Northern Michigan University and Redbud Roots, our copper sponsors, Cannabis Council, DA Advisory Group, the Business Law Group, Med Farms, and Bates Architecture. Now, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator of today's event, Gus Burns, an MLive journalist and cannabis insider, for an update on cannabis in the news. Gus Burns. Gus, how are you, my friend? Do we have Gus?
All right, sorry about that. My name is Gus Burns. I'm the cannabis reporter for MLive, and I became a cannabis reporter in the summer of 2019. So I just kind of want to start off by going through some of the things I've covered since I started reporting on this. And one of the first things we dealt with as a reporter and in the industry was when the MRA had to make some quick safety testing changes last fall to the nationwide vaping scare that led to lung illnesses and deaths due to vitamin E acetate in vaping cartridges. And since then, there have been some reports of vaping cartridge shortages potentially impacted by that crisis. The state early this year moved to eliminate caregiver marijuana from the licensed market and entirely phased out caregiver sales earlier this month. And that's a big deal because prior to 2020, the bulk of flower sold in the medical marijuana shops across the state originated from caregivers. Some of the latest news coming out of the MRA is a decision to get rid of a prerequisite requirement that barred businesses from operating in the recreational market unless they also held a medical business license. The state is doing away with that requirement in March, and this raises questions about the future of the medical marijuana market alongside the recreational market as it continues to grow. Leaders in Michigan's largest market, potentially, Detroit, this week, announced that they are unveiling a potential ordinance that will now allow businesses there to join the recreational market. So far, the city, Detroit, had only allowed medical sales. And another big move this week came in Grand Rapids, where the stores there made their first recreational sales. And as going forward, now it's time to see what other big Michigan cities, including places like Flint and Saginaw, will do and whether or not they will also join the industry. With that update, you'll be seeing more of me in a bit, but now a message from our presenting sponsor, Select.
A story of Select, yeah.
The story of Select?
Well, that's a good story. It all started right here in Portland, Oregon. The founder had this friend who had a cough.
I had a cough.
A terrible, burning cough.
It wasn't that bad, but you get the idea.
See, every time he smoked, Something was irritating his throat.
Fiberglass or plexiglass or carbon fiber.
It's silica fiberglass. Makes you cough.
So the founder invented a better cartridge.
But this one used organic cotton.
From Japan. The best.
So much better.
And that's how it all went.
Wait, you're forgetting the florist. He's the growing specialist, knows everything about the plant,
It smells like Shangri-La.
and it's never good enough.
Could be better.
And then you've got the oil man.
I'm the oil man. Not that kind of oil man.
This guy takes 1 ton of raw harvest
That's 2 tons.
and turns it into oil in no time.
Give me a week.
And finally, the closer. She's the door opener, setting up shop state by state, establishing better protocols, better practices, and better programs. Better not ask how she sleeps.
I sleep like a baby.
And the rest is history.
Okay, wait, so we're not going to talk about the bud tender relationships?
We're not going to talk about CBD?
So we're not gonna do a big company group shot?
Look, it takes a lot of people who believe in better to make better. But that's why it's better. Because it's better.
What?
They'll get it.
That was nice. And I think we all learned a little something.
Love that video. Okay, so we're going to get started today and bring in our first speaker, Robin Schneider, to discuss the road to legalization here in Michigan. Robin serves as the executive director of the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association. The association acts as a united voice for the medical and adult use cannabis businesses and advocates for a responsible and successful industry by promoting sensible laws and regulations and industry best practices among members. Robin, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Robin Schneider. I'm the executive director of the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association. We are the state's largest cannabis trade association, 270 members now, and we've been busy the last couple of years. I'd like to just start by thanking MLive for inviting me today to talk about the road to legalization and what it took us to get here. Now, if I told you the entire story about Michigan's legalization effort, it would take several hours, but I've only got 5 minutes, so I've narrowed it down just a bit. In late 2016, an organization called the Marijuana Policy Project came to Michigan, and they began the coalition building process. Marijuana Policy Project, which is based out of Washington, D.C., has done state and ballot initiatives all over the country and won. So when they showed up, we knew that it was a serious opportunity. We partnered with grassroots organizations such as Michigan Legalize and My Normal. We included the ACLU and others to form the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, which was the ballot committee that ultimately led legalization to victory in Michigan. Once the coalition was formed, we began the drafting process, which included many months of coalition members and the attorneys at Hultgren participating in a drafting committee. We knew how important it was to get that ballot language right if we were going to actually win the campaign. So we did extensive polling and focus groups to make sure that we knew what the voters in Michigan wanted and what they would support. I pulled the polling back out yesterday to help jog my memory on how we came to the conclusions that we did. And the voters who were polled were adamant. They wanted a free market. They wanted fair and equitable licensing, and they wanted to have opportunity for average Michiganders to get their foot in the door in the cannabis industry. They were adamantly opposed to any type of monopoly. And when questioned about it, the voters were clear that they would not vote for legalization effort or language that included monopolistic principles. So we drafted that in a way that would be fair and equitable and a free market. There was overwhelming support for industrial hemp in Michigan and for the complete legalization of CBD products. Which is why that was included in the ballot initiative. In fact, it was in the high 70s as far as support. So that was very exciting to us. And actually, it was a surprise as we were drafting the language. So we were sure to include that industrial hemp component. They also, the polling also showed they wanted us to support veterans. So we included funding for cannabis as treatment for veterans with PTSD. And the voters that were polled were very specific that they wanted cannabis tax revenue to go to schools, local governments, road and critical infrastructure, and specifically not to law enforcement. And so we drafted that in accordance with the polling that I pulled out yesterday. Finally, they wanted expungement. And expungement was very important to the voters. So when we were working to include expungement in the language, unfortunately, we learned that it would break the state single subject rule. And had we included expungement, it could have thrown the entire initiative off of the ballot. And we were forced to leave it out, which is something that those of us who were members of the coalition didn't feel good about. But once we all agreed to the language, we launched the petition drive, which included both paid petitioners and an army of volunteers, including veterans who were excited about the PTSD study language, as well as those folks from MyLegalize and Michigan NORML who were so helpful to the cause. I was the campaign fundraiser. And this was truly a grassroots effort. We fought very hard for every signature and every campaign contribution that we got. Our opposition liked to portray legalization as, funded by, big businesses that are going to come and take over. That couldn't have been further from the truth. Our campaign was funded mostly by a lot of small donor checks, fundraisers. We traveled all over the country to do that. And so it really, truly was a grassroots effort. And so, moving forward, where are we now? Finally getting to see the realization of legalization and that tax revenue coming in, local municipalities beginning to opt in, that equity in licensing is finally beginning to happen. The Michigan legislature just passed the clean slate expungement package that the governor just signed. And now cannabis companies, including our members, are working to contribute to causes moving forward, including the Last Prisoner Project's Free Michael Thompson effort. A number of our members contributed heavily to that. And that is one thing I will say about those in the cannabis industry. They do a wonderful job of remembering where we came from and continuing to contribute back to ensure that we are not leaving those who were incarcerated or disproportionately harmed by cannabis incarceration behind. So other than that, I'm happy to be here. And I would just like to finish by thanking MLive for so many years of fair and balanced coverage of our industry and the cannabis issue. Thank you so much.
Robin, thank you. That was awesome. And if you have not had a chance to connect with Robin, I urge you to do that either in the chat right now or after the event is over. And at this time, I want to take a minute to thank a couple of our other sponsors. A big shout out to Native Michigan Remedies and Continental Companies, because without sponsors like them, things like this do not come to fruition. And with that, it's time for our keynote speaker. Andrew Brisbo is the director of the Marijuana Regulatory Agency. You might know it as the MRA. Andrew has been licensing and regulating within the state of Michigan since 2004. Experience with the Michigan Gaming Control Board, Department of State, and occupational and health professional licensing. It is absolutely my pleasure to welcome Andrew Brisbo. Andrew?
Eric, thanks for that introduction. Licensing and regulating is just as exciting as you all might think it is. But I appreciate the opportunity to always talk about what's happening in the regulated space in Michigan. It's an exciting time, and it's an exciting thing to be a part of from the state's perspective, from the perspective of those of us who work in the Marijuana Regulatory Agency, because it's not very often as someone who's spent his career working in government, you get to be a part of something that's new and has so much interest around it. And I could hear it, and I caught the tail end of Robin's comments there. So the passion that people have for seeing this be successful in Michigan and for those opportunities that exist within this space. So, the agency's really been working hard at implementing these laws, both starting in 2016 with the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act and with the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act that we've been implementing since last year. So sort of a little bit about where we stand now. We can't get lost in the fact that the agency also administers the patient registry program, which is still around. I think it's sometimes misperceived that went away with legalization, but we still have about 245,000 registered patients in the state. So we continue to work on that program. As expected, we've seen the participation in that diminish somewhat with legalization, but the agency still is administering that program. We still have 31,000 caregivers in the state as well. When we look at kind of trends of what's happening in the regulated space in the state, I just got the updated numbers earlier today. When we look at the number of licensees who are participating now in the commercial market, we have about 705 active medical licensees within that program, about 429 active adult use licensees who are on our rolls in the state regulatory program, continuing to see those numbers go up. But we are starting to see now a transition on the industry side away from strictly the medical side, moving more into the adult use space, which is somewhat predictable considering sort of the number of eligible participants from a business perspective. As anticipated, a lot of those medical facilities who are licensed immediately wanted to jump into the adult use space and take advantage of the opportunity to access a population of potentially $3 to $4 million, 4 million consumers who might be interested in participating or seeking products through the regulated market. Municipal participation is still something we track at the agency level within both laws. There is a component of requiring that there be municipal authorization for state licensure as a prerequisite for state licensure. We have 151 municipalities participating on the medical side and 78 participating on the adult use side. Those numbers have been a little bit stagnant, though we have seen a little bit of growth over the past couple of weeks with more opt-in ordinances adopted. And we just heard this week that the city of Detroit is intending to move forward with an adult use authorizing ordinance as well. A lot of that's certainly been slowed by the pandemic with the ability of public bodies to meet the energy and attention that's been focused on pandemic response efforts has certainly put a damper on moving forward with local ordinances to participate. And that can be somewhat of a limiting factor on the commercial side because that limits the number of possible locations where facilities can be located. But despite that, it certainly has not had a dampering effect on the consumer demand for products within the market. Really seen tremendous growth over the past year. If sales continue close to what we've seen over the past several months, we should have about $1 billion in total sales in the market in Michigan this year when you combine medical and adult use sales. And that's very interesting when you look at the study that we commissioned through Michigan State University. That's about a third of what is estimated to be the total market in the state just within the first year of truly having a regulated program, which obviously had to get up and running over those first several months. The pandemic certainly didn't slow things down. The last month we just had medical sales in the state last November. We had about $26 million in retail sales. The month of the pandemic really hit hard in the state in March. In March, we had about $52 million in sales. So in 4 months, we saw a doubling in the total retail output. And then 4 months later in July, $109 million. So that's not going to keep doubling every 4 months, but it is interesting that over that 8-month period, we saw it double twice. And now we've reached sort of the static point of over $100 million in sales within the market. And we've also seen an increase in production to start to meet that demand. The agency has phased out the plan that allowed for supplemental inventory to come from the caregiver market into the regulated commercial market over time. And we've seen that really start to spur some growth within the production on the industry side as well. So we look at stats, 85,000 plants in production last October, up to 197,000 in March, and 397,000 as of August. And we're obviously well over 400,000 now. So we're seeing that investment happening on the business side into creating those products in the state. You see the supply side start to catch up to meet demand, presents tremendous economic opportunity. We're getting to the point now where the tax revenue is going to start being distributed to local governments and to counties and for roads and schools. So really fulfilling that vision that was laid out in the ballot initiative when we see the opportunities that's providing for. from the agency's perspective, when we talk about policy, really a focus on a few different things. Social equity is always at the forefront. When we look at opportunities for those individuals who come from communities that were disproportionately impacted by marijuana prohibition, the agency has a dedicated team that works on social equity. And I've also been working now with a panel of individuals I call the Racial Equity Advisory Work Group to focus on some more narrow issues of diversity and inclusion for people of color within the burgeoning industry in the state of Michigan, developing some policy ideas that either we can implement at the agency level or that we can escalate to the legislature for consideration in order to create a level playing field and start to provide opportunities for those individuals in those communities that were most impacted by the war on drugs. The agency continues to be committed to collaboration and outreach as well. Have a great relationship with Robin and her group at the Cannabis Industry Association, meet regularly with all those stakeholder groups so that we can make informed decisions when it comes to policy making at the agency level, making sure that we're fulfilling our mission, of course, to protect consumers and ensure that access to the regulated market is as safe as possible, but making sure that we're presenting an opportunity for businesses of all sizes to be successful in the state as well, considering the impacts on industry when we're implementing regulations and consideration for all of those aspects that affect all stakeholders as things continue to grow in the state. And then one other thing that is front of mind is the burgeoning hemp industry in the state as well, and the intersections of industrial hemp with marijuana. They were ultimately talking about cannabis one way or another, but the intersections between hemp and marijuana are proving to be greater than the separations. So we're working closely with our partners at the Department of Agriculture to ensure the way in which we are regulating cannabis is as smart as possible, and that we're honoring those intersections, providing opportunities for economic growth while preserving consumer safety, but considering how those two things interplay and what the future of that may be as we work toward potential for changes on the national landscape for marijuana that will catch up to that industrial hemp market, and how we can manage that and position Michigan to be a leader overall and continue to provide economic opportunity in the state. So that's kind of my high level overview of what we have going in the state of Michigan from a regulator's perspective. But I'm happy to take any questions or address any concerns that might be out there as well.
Sure. All right, Andrew, then I'm going to bring Gus Burns back in for a second, and we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, but I want to be mindful of your time. So when when you've got to jump, just let us know that. The first question is, in some of Michigan's marijuana law, plants count for licensing that are defined by any living plant with roots in a medium and leaves that produce food for the plant. In other areas, plants count as defined as mature plants measuring over 8 inches tall and or wide. Can you please explain why one is defined instead of the other? My company is going to be applying for recreational growers in March, and some clarity would be helpful.
Sure. Boy, nothing drives me crazier as an administrator than when we have terms meaning different things within the statutes that we're in charge of in the state. But the reality is that under the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act, it specifically defined what a plant was. The Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act did not offer that definition. So one of the things that we looked at when promulgating the rules, and so this would only apply then to the adult use market, is how we could ensure that the space being utilized and the investment being made by the grower side of the industry, which would include the micro businesses and the class A, B, and C growers, was devoted to plants that I'll say are viable. We know that immature plants, not all of them reach viability. And what we're really trying to track then is the number of plants that are being grown that are going to be harvested and produce flower that's ultimately moved through the market. I mean, that's where the profits are made for the businesses. So where we had the ability to offer some definition for how we were counting those plant totals on the adult use side, we provided a little bit of breathing room by saying we're only going to count those plants that have reached maturity as we define that in the administrative rule set.
Awesome. And then we'll see if Gus has questions, and then we will let you get on with your afternoon, my friend. Okay. Gus?
Perhaps the most important question to be answered is, that headshot's a little bit old. Is it better with the beard, or should I go back to the clean shot?
I do love the COVID beard is excellent, my friend. I do love the COVID beard for sure.
Can't dodge the hard-hitting questions here that people want.
Well, I'm not a journalist, so it's not my job to get you with the hard-hitting questions about your beard. So
All right, I'm on now. Hey, Director Brisbo. I guess one of the questions that appeared in the Q&A that you might be able to answer is, there's a lot of money obviously coming in from all the applications at $6,000 a pop. Can you explain what happens with that money, and is this a price? This going to continue, or are you going to look at changing those amounts?
Sure. So we collect fees at the agency, and this is a revenue neutral program when it comes to the fee structure for the most part. Now I'll get into some of those details. The application fee is used to offset the cost of processing the applications and doing the background investigations. And then on the medical side, we have a regulatory assessment, and the adult use side, we have license and renewal fees that are authorized there. So that's all intended to fund the operation of the MRA, the support we receive from the AG's office for legal counsel and representation, for MSP support. So they have a marijuana tobacco investigation section we provide some of the funding for. They help us with issues of, criminal issues that may come to our attention. We forward over to them for assistance, and they help us with background investigations. And then the Department of Treasury for administering and collecting the taxes. So we collect through those revenue streams. We fund those programs. What we do is we analyze what those costs are, what's appropriated through the legislature, and make sure that we position those fees as best we can to cover those costs. So on an ongoing basis, that's going to be reevaluated. For example, the fees that we charge for the regulatory assessment under the MMFLA went down substantially by more than half for this coming fiscal year, starting in October, because now we have many more businesses paying into that. When we set up the program, only those initial licensees were paying that fee. So now those initial licensees are paying their renewal fees, plus we have new licensees coming on board. So the more that pay into that, where those fixed costs are now covered by the agency, we'll have to expand a bit as the industry grows, particularly to make sure that our field operations can canvass the state appropriately and ensure consumer protections and compliance. But we'll start to see those fees come down.
All right. I'm sure you get hit up a lot by businesses in this industry, and you kind of have an idea what changes are coming, whether it be regulation wise or what new products might be allowed into the market. Can you give us a couple things that we can expect to see in that realm over the next year?
Yeah, I definitely get hit up by businesses. I also get hit up by people I didn't really know in high school that suddenly think we're friends, that want ideas on how they're going to get in as well. Become very popular when you take on some of these roles. But I think that the big thing that the agency has been spearheading, working with the legislature on, is looking at a single regulatory program collapsing into a single market, instead of having a completely different licensing system for medical facilities and for adult use establishments, collapsing that to one approach. So we would license marijuana operations in one pathway. So kind of combining the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act into the ballot initiative so that we have a single system. The agency's kind of already taken that approach from an administrative level, in that the rules we've promulgated now are a single set. There are some called out differences, nuanced differences between adult use and medical businesses at this point. But what we're really talking about is growing marijuana plants, processing them, selling the products, transporting, testing. The similarities between those two markets are much greater than the differences. So it makes more sense to do that in a single pathway. We think that will obviously make the administration of the program easier. It will reduce costs and improve efficiencies for the businesses. And one of the big gains is I think it'll make for a simpler approach, a less confusing approach for municipalities as well, which may lead to greater municipal participation when we get some of those clarifications in. We're obviously, I sort of alluded to it earlier, looking at how the hemp market interplays with the marijuana market, residual THC from hemp processing, whether there's a pathway where that can be used, looking at new technologies for converting cannabidiol into tetrahydrocannabinol, so CBD into THC, and where that fits into the marketplace as well, trying to stay ahead of some of those advancements in technology. And then policy-wise, the output of the Racial Equity Advisory Work Group, I think, will lead to some potential policy shifts in order to improve diversity and equity within the industry, which, Michigan wanting to be a leader in all spaces, that's one of those key areas. That's a part of every national conversation I have as to how equity is considered as part of this new industry. And we're all kind of struggling with overcoming some of the hurdles to get there. But I'm very excited about some of the ideas that are being presented by the thought leaders in this space through that advisory work group.
All right.
Awesome, my friends. Andrew, thank you so much for the time. We will let you go for the afternoon. Gus, stick around because we're going to get into our first panel discussion about the current state of the industry, specifically the opportunities and obstacles we're facing in Michigan. And as you have been putting questions in the Q&A, we will do our best to answer them throughout the afternoon. So hang tight if you've got one in there. So first, I'd like to welcome Bob Hendricks. Bob has a state level leadership role with the MRA. He reviews, analyzes, and advises on the development of marijuana laws and regulations. He represents growers, provisioning centers, processors, staffing providers, secure transporters, and other cannabis-focused businesses. Additionally, Bob is a member of Attorney General Dana Nessel's group that advises on marijuana law in Michigan and at the federal level. Welcome, Bob. And also Patrick Shugru. He is the co-founder and principal of the Business Law Group. And since 1983, Patrick has served as a legal counsel and business advisor in connection with numerous business organizations, structuring, capitalization, finance, merger, acquisition, and other strategic transactions. His clients span many industries, including cannabis, real estate, opportunity zones, energy, and technology. Patrick? And let's say hello to Chris Ramos. He is the Director of Operations for our presenting sponsor, Select, and their Michigan operations, bringing years of lean manufacturing experience to Select. Chris focuses on continuous improvement in all aspects of the business, and his experience has allowed them to pivot as things in the state of Michigan, as he has said and others have said, moves very, very fast and very, very slow at the same time. So being nimble is a key set. So say hello to Chris Ramos and welcome back Gus Burns. Gentlemen.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. And hopefully this will be kind of a more open discussion. So I might pose questions to individual people, but everyone can feel free to jump in on any of these. And I guess to start off with Bob Hendricks, you participated in crafting the law that the state's now using to guide its regulations. Going back to when this all happened, if you had to go back, what might you change about the current law as it exists? If you had to power change one thing with the licensing process, what would it be?
Well, I think our legislature missed an opportunity when the MRTMA ballot initiative was first prepared. It's submitted to the legislature, and the legislature had the opportunity at that point to try to integrate the medical marijuana law set forth in the Facilities Licensing Act with the ballot initiative that had been proposed. And had they done that, Andrew talked earlier about some of the inconsistencies between the way the laws work. A lot of those inconsistencies could probably have been eliminated, and we would have had one path as opposed to two paths for the legalization of medical marijuana on the one hand and adult use. We missed that opportunity. We may get it again, but now that the adult use initiative is the law, it takes a 75% supermajority of both houses in order to change that law. So we maybe missed an opportunity that we'll never be able to correct.
Right. And so, I mean, that kind of conflict presents barriers to entry to the industry, but there are a lot of other obvious barriers. And I think this question is pointed to Patrick Shugru. We have huge interest in the industry, and there are a lot of barriers, whether it be costs, the licensing process that's tedious, conflicting laws. Financing can be tricky, especially since we have a state legalization, yet the federal laws say that marijuana is still illegal. So talk about what you do on the front end of this industry and what are some of the struggles that people looking for investors and looking for financing, what are they running into?
Well, thanks, Gus. And once again, I'd like to echo my appreciation to MLive for hosting this conference and be a part of it, and also to Select for presenting it. What we do at the Business Law Group is we assist businesses in all forms of business transactions, including early stage capitalizations. There are a lot of entrepreneurs in this space, and it is expensive. We've talked about the regulations. We've talked about the fact that it's new. We've talked about the fact that we have bifurcated sort of legal infrastructure between state and federal. And all of those create complexities in starting a new business and capitalizing a new business, which is already complex and fraught with risk. And it just is a little bit more accentuated as it deals with cannabis. That said, the general rules of business startups and business capitalizations need to be heeded with again some attenuating circumstances. You've got to have you got to know where you're at in the marketplace. You've got to have a good product. You've got to have a clear understanding of what your mission is, of what your company is going to do. You've got to have a good team, or at least the prospects of a good team. You got to know where you stand in connection with your competition. And then you've got to understand what you're going to need and what it's going to take to access the resources, human resources, financial resources, know-how, relationships are very important. So I guess what I would say to answer your question, Gus, is if you've been an entrepreneur before, this is going to be harder. If you haven't been an entrepreneur before, I would strongly encourage those folks to seek out networking. Robin's organization, Michigan Cannabis Industry Association, will be invaluable. MLive and all of its programs will be invaluable. All of the folks that are speakers on these panels, I am sure will be open to take questions or give some guidance to new entrepreneurs that are entering the space. It is a bit of a club. Yes, there's competition, but we're all trying to figure it out as well, Gus.
All right, and there's been discussion about what might happen down the road with federal legalization, and what kind of, based on what you do, how do you think that might impact entry to how will it impact Michigan's market in general?
Well, I'll speak to that in terms of capitalization and sources of capital, Gus. In the capital markets and in finance, it's not done until it's done. So while the prospect of, for example, the SAFE Act passing Congress is out there, it's passed the House, it has not passed the Senate. We don't know what's going to happen on November 3rd. In terms of financing the business, particularly a new business now, we have to deal with what we have to deal with now. And so I would say that the prospects are probably potentially brighter for a nationwide statutory scheme. But you know, and I'll defer to the other panelists on this. I mean, it's anybody's guess when that's going to happen. In the meantime, we've got folks that are looking to enter the space. We've got folks that are in the middle of a project, purchasing equipment, applying for licenses, spent the soft costs, and they're going to have to turn to what we do in normal business startups, Gus, and that is look to initially friends, family, fools, you might say, in some cases. But as we get going and we've got a development plan and a potential market position, look at potential venture capital, angel capital, that's sort of professional investors going forward. And then for the more seasoned players, those folks that are in the business generating revenue, private equity is there available to them to enter the space to grow their businesses.
Certainly, if federal legalization occurs, there will be two very, very significant and important developments. One will be that it will remove all the cloud that hangs over banking, the marijuana industry right now. And secondly, it will significantly change the federal income taxation rules that apply to marijuana businesses. And both of those developments will probably make Pat's job a little bit easier to find capital and to allocate those resources into the industry. There is also a downside, however. If there is no longer prohibition on interstate transactions involving marijuana, you're going to see a number of national big players begin to really exercise their muscle, and the competitive atmosphere throughout the United States will significantly change. So everything has two sides to every coin.
And speaking of national big players, Chris Ramos, your company exists in multiple states. Can you talk about what it's like going from state to state and what it's been like getting into the Michigan market?
Sure. I'm a Michigan guy, born and bred, and our entire team here in Michigan is a Michigan team, Michigan-based team. That's kind of how as Curaleaf and Select expands into other states, we really look to become part of the community, become fabric of that community. We're not looking to be the big muscle to come into states and muscle people out. We really want to work with with the growers and with the processors and things that are in each state. So. As we go, we hope that we can bring expertise. We hope that we can bring, safety standards, quality standards, and our consistency from state to state. So, consistency is tough when you're, as we're talking about, you can't cross state lines with products. So, growing and manufacturing consistent product is definitely a difficult challenge, and that's what we're really passionate about is the safety and the consistency from state to state and from product to product.
And that safety is kind of what has come into play with the MRA getting rid of caregiver products, so they can kind of have a better tap on where the marijuana originates and how it transforms throughout the supply chain. And that goes back kind of to what happened with the vaping cartridges. People didn't know what was coming in them. How has that changed the way your company handles that product, and how has it changed the industry?
Sure. I wouldn't say that it's changed what we've done dramatically, because kind of, as you saw in that video earlier, I mean, what we've really started with was, Cameron Forney started with wanting to create a better cartridge, whether that was the hardware or the oil. So, testing labs love us across the country because we probably test more frequently than most manufacturers do. Of course, there's the mandated regulating testing that has to come to be, but we test in between those spots as well. So, it's very important to us that, whether we're making distillate oil that goes into cartridges or we're sourcing it from the market, that we check a lot of boxes, and it makes our job much more difficult because we can't just go and buy any oil on the open market that happens to cross our desk. We have to be very specific about what we're buying and what we're purchasing, and the farms and the processors that we use when we're using third parties. So that's kind of the way that we move forward. So the vape crisis obviously was a big deal. We went in California actually and formed a coalition. I think it was about 125, 150 different brands, and really put something together and said, we need to come together and regulate this better. We don't want people going to the black market and buying these things, because effectively that's where a lot of that vitamin E acetate was coming from. And so, it was almost it was a good building block for the industry. While it was a terrible thing that happened, and we don't want to see that at all. We were able to sort of, come together as an industry and figure out how to regulate this better and continue to improve and put out safer products.
Do you have any feeling as to where Michigan's safety and testing requirements are in comparison to the rest of the nation? Are they more stringent, or are there holes in our regulations that could lead to problems down the road?
No, they are pretty stringent, but in a positive way. I think they're pretty on point with California's testing. I'm not very familiar with testing from state to state, but when I do talk to my cohorts in other states, it does seem like Michigan has some pretty strict testing practices and limits and things. So Michigan seems to be doing a great job on the testing front and the regulatory.
Right, and hey, Patrick, kind of going back a little bit, I'm curious as to who the entry-level players are in the industry. I mean, are you seeing mostly big companies, or are you seeing individuals who just have a good knowledge of growing and making and processing, and then how do they build around them to actually get into the market?
Well, in our experience, Gus, it depends on what aspect of the market they're financing. We're seeing some large product companies that have established brands and products bring a lot of capital to the party here in Michigan, and oftentimes are looking for local producers to be able to produce in Michigan legally in a licensed fashion their product for distribution here in Michigan. There are some, well, as Chris has indicated, and with his firm, successfully a multi-state strategy to be able to go in and market product there. So that's kind of at the top end. For the entrepreneurs, the folks that are growers that were maybe medicinal growers and now looking to get into the adult use space or an advanced license in medicinal, they're more likely to be looking for their own capital to back their own strains and their own strategies for growing. In that case, Gus, they're typically looking for what I would call friends, family, and angel capital. Bob raised an excellent point. The financial institutions, the larger, certainly banks, investment firms, et cetera, are still relatively scared of the space. And the reason for that is if you can't open a bank account with a federally chartered or state chartered bank, stand. So we're seeing a lot of the in some cases, some smaller family offices. I will also say we've been successful in having contributions and capitalizations come in the form of what we call in-kind contribution, a building to the venture, contributing construction services to the venture in exchange for equity or some investment value. We're seeing that be very successful strategy for new entrants to the marketplace in terms of capitalization.
Bob, talking back about regulations and how we have two separate, basically distinct markets operating in the same buildings, really, especially on the retail end, and well, every function of the supply chain. How is that going to merge? I mean, how do you foresee that happening, and how will it impact the industry? I assume that medical marijuana is already kind of dipping down in comparison to recreational. Is this something that's going to stick around in the long term?
Well, I think based on the experience in other states that there will likely always be a place for some medical marijuana focused industry in Michigan and in most other states. There are a lot of people who use marijuana for medicinal purposes who don't really associate their use with the adult use market. And so the experience in Colorado and California and other states has been that sector of the marketplace wants to preserve the medical marijuana retail outlets. At the same time, it certainly does appear that the growth of adult use marijuana is the driver for the marijuana industry in Michigan and in all the other states. So there will continue to be kind of a relationship between the two. And I think Andrew and his people at the MRA have accurately assessed that and have really made lots of provisions within the rules to the extent that the laws allow it. They've made provision for the co-location of adult use and medical facilities in many cases. So they're trying to be practical about making the facilities available to these multiple uses, and they're trying to craft rules and regulations that will allow a licensee who seeks to be licensed as both a medical marijuana and an adult use marijuana business, that they can operate those businesses together as long as they also respect the requirements of tracking each of the two types of marijuana separately.
Okay. Chris, going forward, are you or do you know of competitors maybe that are looking into new types of marijuana products? I've heard that Michigan may consider allowing THC infused drinks down the road. Where's the future of the marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think, people are going to continue to innovate as people always do. You're starting to see more and more water soluble or nanotechnology be put into a lot of different products, whether it's gummies or sublingual patches and things. And so I think innovation is definitely going to win. I can't speak directly to a lot of the things that Curaleaf has in the R&D facility right now, but there's definitely new products on the horizon always. I'm sure that flower will always remain supreme, at least, for the foreseeable future. But, people are looking for more convenient ways, more regulated ways, better dosing. So there's definitely going to be new products on the horizon.
One thing that's been interesting to me is I'm not really into the, I don't know, all the technology of marijuana processing, but I've heard, that, and it came up with Director Brisbo, that there is technology out there that allows you to change CBD to THC. I'm wondering how big this is. This on the front end, or is this something that everybody who's a major player is looking into?
I think a lot of people are looking into it, especially with supply chain constrictions. You probably get a lot more people trying to get creative as the supply chain is constricted. But as it expands back, I would imagine that the juice is not worth the squeeze at a certain point. To be trying to convert one thing to the other. But depending on state laws and how you can move things, that might also drive some of that innovation. Being able to ship hemp across state lines, and people get creative.
I know oil prices have fluctuated a lot. Can you talk about what's happened with that and where it seems to be headed?
Sure. As Andrew mentioned, a lot of this was caregiver driven for a long time, and when that sort of got shut down, we saw kind of prices start to increase quite a bit as everything is required to be sourced within the supply chain. So it has to be grown here, has to be extracted here, can't come from out of state, or can't come from someone's backyard or basement. So yeah, we're definitely seeing an increase in price, but as harvest season is upon us and a lot of these outdoor grows are starting to come down, I think it's going to be interesting to kind of see how things shake out over the next few months. Now that there is some pretty large outdoor grows online, and just in general, there's more and more availability. That, I think Andrew said there's about 700 medical licenses and 400 plus recreational adult use licenses. So there's more operators online. There's going to be more supply available.
Right. So I'm assuming it was kind of planned that to some extent that they phased out caregivers right at the time people were starting to harvest. So it basically made sure that there was a little bump in supply. There is still a big difference between medical prices and recreational on the retail level. Do you have any insight as to how you would explain to people why that difference is so big and whether they will kind of even out over time?
Yeah, I would imagine you'd start to see them even out over time. I think it's just a matter of the supply. Like you said, there's 700 plus medical licenses. So there's a lot more suppliers on the medical side. There was a lot more medical product available for a period of time. Adult use is still kind of ramping up, but I think we're going to see adult use eclipse medical very, very soon as far as supply. And I think you're going to start to see prices sort of level off between the two.
Right. And Patrick, behind the scenes, where do you see more of the investment going? What facet of the industry is most of the investment money going towards right now?
I think most of it right now is going to where the action is. That would be on growing and processing and dispensaries or provisioning centers. Getting the product to market, if you will, I think is where nationally most of the action is, and where it is in Michigan as well. And I see that continuing into 2021 and beyond, Gus. We need, and again, interested in Chris's comments on this, but I think the market in Michigan needs more product for the demand, especially as adult use is coming on. And it is tough to get through the licensing regime and then be able to start your business up and capitalize it properly to be able to comply with all the regulations that one is required to comply with.
Krista, do you want to?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we really do need more product. We talk about it frequently that you go to a lot of provisioning centers and you kind of see the same products in these same stores. So as the industry starts to mature in Michigan, as you get more out of state, license deals or operators coming in, and new brands emerging in Michigan, there's a lot of processors here who are creating a whole host of brands. I've seen some of the R&D behind the scenes, and there's a lot of pretty cool stuff coming out soon. So I think we'll definitely begin to see more variety, probably Q1 of next year.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. I am going to turn it back to Eric. I think we also have some questions in the queue, so stay on. Eric, do you mind taking it from here?
Sure, I will grab it from here. Gentlemen, we've got time for like one or two of these, but what I would love is as you guys go backstage, you can still answer them in typed form because there's a bunch of them that we just won't get to, but there was a couple that I wanted to get to. First one for Bob. If the federal government changes the status of cannabis to Schedule II, doesn't that kick the pharmaceutical grade Cannabis Act into gear in Michigan?
Not just in Michigan, but nationally. And the real problem with moving marijuana from Schedule I to Schedule II is a Schedule II drug is subject to FDA regulation. That's why alcohol and tobacco are not Schedule II drugs, because they don't, the government didn't want the FDA to have jurisdiction over that process. So the movement of marijuana from Schedule I to Schedule II would actually be a significant problem for the industry, not only in Michigan, but nationally. It would really be a step backwards to, in the effort to repeal prohibition completely and treat marijuana like alcohol.
Okay, and then this one is for Chris. It says that this may be a little bit off topic, but Chris, I think you'll appreciate this question. You mentioned that Select works with all aspects of the marketplace in each state. Does this extend to community relations? Specifically, does Select and other industry leaders typically support cultural nonprofit entities? So what does Select do in the nonprofit space, if anything?
Sure. One of the first things that I think of is the Possible Plan. You can check it out. I think it's possibleplan.org, and it's a nonprofit that Select has put together to work on expunging wrongful convictions for marijuana convictions across the country. I know that we are still working to identify I think a nonprofit here to work with, but that's definitely in the works, and that's something we do as we expand in other states. We want to work with these community groups. So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So as a reminder, guys, I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll send you guys backstage. If you want to go through, there's about 11 questions that we probably won't get to. If you guys have time to answer before you take off, that would be amazing. The last one, I think will be Patrick and Bob, if you two could kind of tag team to answer this question. The question is essentially, the information on the MRA is in law speak versus layman's terms. Are there resources to help break it down for newer people who want to learn and get started, including things like possible funding options? So I feel Patrick and Bob, you guys could probably handle that as a collab.
Go ahead, Patrick, you start.
Well, again, I'll give another shout out to Robin's organization.
I would too. I would completely agree with that.
I mean, it's a wealth of knowledge for the entrepreneur, for the new entrant in all aspects of the space. And then, just a basic Google research of for example, capitalization, startups or financing, Michigan, but also a lot of the problems are national as well. You'll find some law firm blogs. You'll find, I know Bob's firm publishes a lot of free alerts for folks. So I would just, go to your basic reliable Google for basic background, and then network a lot. We mentioned Robin's organization, but again, pretty much anybody in this MLive forum and in the industry I have found is available and willing to help out folks in good faith looking to enter the space.
Yeah, in Robin's group especially, the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association, she indicated there are over 200 members, and they love to talk with each other about the industry, share tips, and one of the things I've observed in the last several years that I've been working in the industry is there is a tremendous esprit de corps within the marijuana industry here in Michigan. They love to share knowledge and information. There's a lot of resources there.
Awesome, gentlemen. Bob, Chris, and specifically a shout out to you, Patrick, because you survived a Category 1 hurricane to be here today. And I mean that literally, not figuratively. So thank you to all three of you for joining us today. Have a wonderful afternoon. It's at this point, we're going to hear from one of our sponsors, Native Michigan Remedies, right now.
Come on.
And thanks again to Native Michigan Remedies. And on to our next panel. We're going to be covering emerging trends in the cannabis market, and I'm very excited to roll out this panel to you. Joining us first, Anquinette Sarfo, or Q as you may know her. She spent 20 years as a TV journalist, and after 8 years as the morning anchor on Fox 2 in Detroit, she retired due to the effects of MS. Through changes in her diet and using cannabis, she went from taking 9 medications a day to taking none. She's an advocate for teaching others how to lessen their dependency on pharmaceuticals. She's a member of the board of directors of the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association, volunteers with the National MS Society and the League of Women Voters. Q, welcome this afternoon.
Thank you, Eric.
And then I also like to introduce Max Simon. He is the CEO and co-founder of Greenflower. Greenflower is an industry leader in cannabis education and training, producing thousands of hours of online courses and high-quality video content covering every facet of cannabis today, bolstering a network of over 700 top cannabis experts, powering the cannabis curriculum of multiple universities across the United States, and successfully training cannabis workforces around the world. Max, welcome, my friend.
Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. And finally, we have Hunter Mishler he's the director of production for Redbud Roots. And he has been producing concentrates for himself and the medical market for several years, amassing more than 6,000 hours of contact time with various processing methodologies. And with an education in business and administration, he is not only an effective processor, but an excellent team leader capable of driving the facility to exceptional profitability. Hunter, welcome, my friend.
Thank you guys for having me today.
And then I will welcome back in Gus Burns. Gus, the floor is yours, my friend.
All right. Glad everyone could be here. And just like the first session, feel free to jump in anytime you have any opinions or insight into one of the topics we're talking about. But to start off, I would like to start off with Q. I know you've worked with the social equity component in Michigan. I was wondering if you could kind of talk about just what your involvement has been so far. Why you think maybe it hasn't become as big or hasn't taken the form that I think some people had hoped. Still we don't have that many people involved that are in the social equity program, but just kind of give me some background on that.
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the invitation. As Robin Schneider mentioned, I was among quite a few other people in those church basements talking to people about why legalization was important, and expungement did come up, and making sure that the people who were most affected by the war on drugs were also the ones who could reap the benefits of the end of the war on drugs. So I'm proud to say that the clean slate package of laws have been enacted, or they have been signed into law by Governor Whitmer. I was involved on the racial equity work group that Director Brisbo mentioned. And right now we are tasked with looking at if expungement, if there are anything more to be done with expungement. Right now we're focusing on the parole of Michael Thompson, and his parole hearing is up in November 17th, I believe. So we'll be watching those proceedings closely. But the clean slate package of bills have been passed, and so that's a huge step forward. And right now with the state's racial equity task force, we're looking at ways to expand the program. As Director Brisbo mentioned, some of those may be procedural changes that could be implemented through his department, or things that could be suggested to the legislature. In addition to looking at expungement, my task force, or my subcommittee in particular, we're looking at medical marijuana and health disparities in communities of color. We feel that if we can get more maybe doctors and medical professionals on board, that would also help with social equity. Also, one of the huge, a big hindrance to the social equity program is funding. And the state is aware of that. It's hard to implement a social equity program when you have applicants who don't have access to financial resources. And so that is a huge problem that has yet to, we still haven't come up with a solution for that. But also another hindrance to implementing a social equity plan is that there are very few blueprints. You have some municipalities that have done some things, Illinois, for example, they have money set aside for social equity candidates. I know some communities in California have done some innovative ways to bolster social equity numbers. And I have to say, Detroit, as they unveiled their social equity plan yesterday, it's interesting that they have prioritized locals, legacy Detroiters, to be involved in the industry to the point of withholding 50% of the licenses to make sure that in a city that is 82+% African American, that you have African Americans and people who live in those communities, who have been in those communities for quite a significant amount of time, to be involved in the industry. So there's a blueprint that's still being formed, and definitely a lot of work to be done, but we're making progress. And the good thing is that people have the option to write their own social equity plan. That is also part of the law, that these companies, they have to have one, but it's up to them to create what social equity looks like within their companies. I'm done. I can only see you, Gus, but.
Good work you're doing, Q.
I'm also a member of Green Flower, so thank you for doing what you do.
I was just going to say, we should team up. You know, we're starting to power the education of a lot of these social equity programs, so maybe there's something for us to talk about offline.
Absolutely, I look forward to it.
We've lost Gus.
All right. Can you hear me?
You're back.
All right, I'm back. So I guess the one component of social equity and getting more people into the industry is education. Max, can you give us a background on what kind of education is going on and what's coming to Michigan, especially kind of in the more mainstream as far as a degree type thing? What's going on in Michigan with that?
Yeah, so I run Green Flower, and we've been producing industry-leading education since 2014. And what's really exciting right now in 2020 is that education is really kind of grabbing a hold, and it's grabbing a hold in a bunch of different ways. You know, we're seeing floods of new people come to us from all over the country, just directly to our site, so that they can start to really learn the facts and the science and the skills needed to participate in the cannabis industry. But then secondly, we're seeing companies now that are really deciding to take an active stance in bringing education into their workforce, so that people aren't just kind of left to figure things out on their own. And, you know, we're very fortunate to be powering the education and training platforms of many large companies. But the thing that's probably most exciting is that higher education is really starting to take this seriously. And if you think about what higher education does, you know, they're really designed to serve the job market. And so what I believe is the greatest leader of our country right now in the cannabis space is Northern Michigan University. You know, not only do they have a 4-year degree in medicinal plant chemistry, but they now have a 2-year associate's degree in indoor agriculture. And then they partnered with Green Flower to power their non-credit certificate programs through their continuing education department. And so we now offer 4 programs that are non-credit, that is in agriculture, growing the plant, in business, and really understanding the industry and how to be successful and in compliance. The medical program, which is for allied healthcare professionals to really learn the therapeutic benefits of cannabis and the mechanisms of action, as well as a cannabis policy and law program, both for the legal professionals as well as for people interested in the compliance and regulatory side. And so it's exciting because higher education, you know, with Northern Michigan University really leading the pack, is getting a lot more interested. And, you know, we launched our programs with Northern Michigan just this year and have already had close to 70 students that have signed up for these programs, with our first 30 actually completing these 6 months programs coming up here, and a brand new cohort starting actually on Monday. So anybody that's paying attention and wants to jump into these training sides, you should look at these Northern Michigan University programs, because the next cohort starts literally next week. So it's been really exciting to see, you know, this wave of interest in cannabis education coming from, you know, all sectors of the industry.
Are we going to get more Michigan universities involved in this?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely open to it. I mean, we Green Flower tends to pick partners in select places. Northern Michigan is our Michigan partnership. We have schools throughout the country, though, like UC Riverside out here in California and Florida Atlantic University in Florida. So we found our partners in Michigan and Northern Michigan University, but certainly I do see more and more schools taking this seriously because, higher education is kind of hurting right now. They've had to shift all to online. And again, higher education is about bolstering the job market. And so there's, very few industries that are continuing to grow and accelerate at both a local and a national level like cannabis. And I do believe that there should be more schools in Michigan that'll take part.
Certainly think that that's critical from an industry perspective, just that the education only serves to improve the industry as a whole, as more people are becoming more educated, not only in terms of what it takes to produce cannabis products and to grow plants, but what it can do and how to speak about cannabis in an educated and intelligent way. I think it only serves to improve both the social standing of cannabis across the country, as well as improve the quality of products here in Michigan and across the country. You have a much higher quality talent pool coming into the industry, and it's easier to find local talent, which for me, working here in Michigan, it's incredible to see universities and people such as yourself, Max, taking such a priority being placed on education. And those individuals that choose to go out and educate themselves only better their standing and the industry standing here in Michigan.
Yeah, I'll actually speak to that too, Hunter, that, one of the programs we set up through these college relationships is something called the Employer Network. And that's where companies sign up to get first access to this kind of pool of vetted talent. And then, of course, the students get access to be able to get jobs in the industry. And it's been met with such enthusiasm on all sides, which I think shows you when something is a good fit, because one of the biggest complaints we see from the cannabis industry is how difficult it is to find people who are truly skilled and talented in cannabis, but also the kind of workers that, are going to make good, dedicated, hardworking, loyal followers to the company. And so I think people that take their own self-interest in education really match that criteria well, because you have to invest in that education and time and resources, and to get credentialed is an important part of the process. And so it speaks volumes to employers to have people that are really self-educated. So I definitely keep beating the drum to every individual who's watching. If you really are serious about playing a role in the cannabis industry, keep getting your education, because it's more than ever becoming really crucial to be able to stand out in this marketplace.
All right. I was logged off for a couple seconds, but I'm back. And I guess this question would be for Hunter. Related to education, you deal with a lot of the advancing technologies in the industry. What are some of those technologies, and what do people who want to get involved on the upper end of this technology, what are they going to need to know about?
I think that in general, some of the technologies are coming oftentimes from outside of the cannabis industry. One of the coolest parts for me is seeing how cannabis can align with existing manufacturing practices in other industries. So kind of being educated enough to be able to analyze different trends within other industries and see how things are done. You're able to bring that into cannabis and become a more efficient, produce better products. So going and getting your education, we really can't state that more clearly, is so critical to both an individual's success and a company's. So going forth and following your passion, I think that we all could agree that this is an industry built by passionate people. So finding something that you love to do and love to study and becoming as educated as possible will allow you to find your own way in cannabis. So for us, it's about finding talented chemists that can help formulate new products, come up with different means of processing, because we certainly have not seen the most growth within cannabis technology as we will in the next couple of years, I believe, as the industry becomes bigger and bigger.
And as far as new entrants into that technology portion of the industry, are they generally, do you see they're generally coming from a background with cannabis, whether it be working before legalization, or does it come from people shifting over from other sectors?
For Redbud personally, I think it's been about 50-50. People that have a lot of industry experience are certainly valuable, However, there's something to be said for the person that you can bring in that has a passion for the plant and the products, and you can show them how to do it and to teach them your way, I suppose. So it's certainly pretty equal at the moment, but I expect we'll see that change with programs like Northern Michigan's starting to create that existing talent pool that we're looking for.
Right. Q, I know you have had some dealings with the Detroit area marijuana market, and the big news that came out of there this week was that they will allow recreational, and that they put in stipulations that a certain number of the businesses they allow will have to be basically Detroit natives. What can you just kind of tell us about what's going on in Detroit and how because they've got kind of a unique ordinance they're presenting. Explain what that is and how that might affect that little market of Michigan and the future of the rest of the Michigan.
Well, as I believe either Robin or Director Brisbo mentioned earlier, Detroit is the largest market in the state. I should also mention I'm no longer involved in the Detroit market, my involvement professionally anyway, but we as the organization, and I legalize, we care about social equity. And so yesterday, the city of Detroit announced their social equity proposal. Of course, it still has to go before the full council and go through public hearings. But in a nutshell, it will reserve 50% of the licenses to legacy Detroiters. A legacy Detroiter is someone who is defined as someone who has lived in Detroit for 15 of the last 30 years, including the last year. If you are a low income resident, the residency requirement is 13 out of the last 30 years. And if you have a marijuana possession conviction, it is 10 years out of the last 30 years. The city is also setting aside, they're allowing these candidates who qualify for legacy status to purchase city-owned properties at 75% off if they are within the green zone. That's the zone that allows cannabis businesses. They're also allowing for 35 social consumption lounges. There are Detroit's provisioning center number is capped at 75. That's medical or recreational, or adult use, I should say. They are also allowing for micro businesses. I'm not sure about the number, the cap on that, or if there's a cap on that. The legacy requirements are also in place for grows, for processors, and some other, about 10 license categories. And again, they are doing a sort of tandem licensing process if this is approved. So once a medical, let's say if you're just looking at provisioning center licenses, once a medical facility is granted an adult use license, the next person in line has to be a Detroiter, a social equity candidate from the recreational side. So they're doing one by one licensing. And of course, that is bringing up some questions from people who have medical licenses, because as the numbers stand now, some of them will not get an adult use license because they're going to be after the cap. So Detroit is aware that there may be some legal challenges, but the ballot initiative and the law gives every community the right to draft an ordinance that is in the best interest of that community and the people within that community. And Detroit feels that as a municipality, that is one of the few which is allowing adult use sales. They have the right and an obligation to make sure that Detroiters are part of this revenue building and an opportunity to amass generational wealth for Detroiters. And so this is a plan that they feel is in the best interests of Detroiters. And we, as the members of the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association, support what they are doing, because at the end of the day, they're one of the few places that will allow these sales, and they're making sure that the people who live and have supported Detroit through generations, through decades, are able to take advantage of this opportunity.
All right, yeah, and I think that they've kind of, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I mean, does it seem like they're setting a trend for local municipalities as to how they can contribute to the social equity program? I mean, they could have gone head in a long time ago. There were businesses operating in the medical field who wanted them to, and probably were irritated when they heard that Detroit's not going to jump into this. Like, I guess, how does that play out down the road for social equity, that decision by Detroit?
Well, Detroit held off on opting into the adult use program because of the way the law was written. And the law stated that for 2 years, the only people who were allowed to apply for recreational adult use, forgive me for keep saying recreational, but for adult use licenses are people who have already held medical licenses. To hold a medical license, you cannot have a criminal record. So you have a lot of people in Detroit who were barred from entering the market because they had records. And so Detroit did pretty much the only thing they could do. They held off opting into the program so they can make sure more Detroiters were able to participate in the program. So it was, and now because the state also had the option of rescinding that rule based on market conditions, Director Brisbo has decided to no longer require that adult use applicants be medical applicants first. And since that rule is being rescinded effective March 1st, that allows for social equity candidates to apply in Detroit.
Hunter, like, I guess related to the same topic, what does your company do related to social equity? And I guess how do you see the importance of whether or not companies participate in helping out people who have been disproportionately impacted by prohibition?
I think that cannabis in general has come from such a grassroots movement. It's been such a coalition of people from all different walks of life coming together to really make sure that this happened. So for me, I'd like to view the cannabis industry in general as one built by people, not any particular group. So it's about remembering where we come from and functioning as a community with everyone involved. So for Redbud Roots, we take a lot of pride in supporting our local communities in every fashion. All of our different provisioning centers work very closely with different nonprofits in each city that we feel best represents our goals as well as can benefit the cities. So we really focus on hiring and bringing in people that we feel are amazing candidates who may not have gotten a chance without this opportunity provided by the state. We are all certainly very grateful to be sitting here today in the industry. And it's important to remember where we came from and that people who haven't had the same opportunity definitely deserve the same chances that we're afforded now. So it's working on an individual basis to provide opportunity for people and their families, and on a larger scale, working in communities to both improve the overall standing of the community and the subsets of people that have been neglected within each one.
Thanks. Max, do you see much diversity among people who are trying to get educated about the cannabis industry? Or do you think that the diversity needs to expand?
I mean, I think that when it comes to education, first off, it's a big world, right? And like, for example, this year we contributed $50,000 in scholarships to the Last Prisoner Project for their expungement and reentry program. And we've partnered with Cookies to power their social equity education programs. And we look for every opportunity, quite frankly, to work on some of these social equity programs. And yet it's just a small, tiny piece. You know, the problem with the current social equity environment is that so few people can actually get through it, that even what's being done is just a tiny, small fraction of what's possible. And so certainly, you know, on Green Flower's side, we have this educational tool that we just want to get in the hands of as many people as possible that are looking for ways to be successful in the cannabis industry. And so whether that's through social equity, I mean, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, we actually ended up giving away over $2 million in free education programs just to help out the global community that was, you know, all of a sudden in a very tough moment. And we continue to look for these partnerships where we can use this technology and platform that we've built to serve the industry. Because ultimately, I think education can help everybody. It can help everything from the social equity side to the new entrants. You know, one of the questions earlier was, is it cannabis people that are kind of learning business, or is it, you know, other skilled people that don't know cannabis coming in? And we're finding there's a very large surge of people that are non-cannabis people looking to come in with existing skill sets that are relevant and applicable to cannabis, whether that be accountants or finance professionals or chemists or good manufacturing practice experts. Those people need education and training to be able to enter the industry and actually get a foothold. And so, my world of education touches a lot of different factors, and we just believe that it's important fundamentally for people to become intelligent and well-trained, because that's how we can lift up the industry, bring more credibility and legitimacy to the industry, and give opportunity to people who really are passionate about being involved.
All right, I appreciate that. And I think we're about out of time for this panel, so I'll turn it back to Eric.
Thank you, Gus. All right, guys, I've got a couple more questions, and then we'll let you get on with your day. Max and Q, this first question would be for you guys. It's something that we haven't touched on today, but it's a question that we get, at least on our side, often. And with both of your wealth of experience in content and producing videos and all that sort of thing, what advice would you give to people coming into this space about the amount of stuff that the amount of videos, the amount of blog posts, the amount of stuff that they should be creating, and B, what's your best advice on how they should do that? Because this is obviously a much different animal to do marketing in than just about everything else that you would be doing in the state of Michigan.
Well, I guess I'll go first. Thank you for the question. I first keep your videos short. Second, recognize that Facebook is very problematic and will shut you down over things that may be educational. I have decided to do, last year I was doing tea parties, educational tea parties, where we would have people come into a bed and breakfast in Detroit, and I would walk them through making maybe an edible. We would do infused food. I would teach them how to use a pipe versus a bowl versus a vaporizer. I'm happy to say that Select has agreed to sponsor my efforts into changing my in-person tea parties into a virtual tea party. And so we're going to kick those off in January, because there is a tremendous need for people, not just on the provisioning center side, not on the employee side, but also the consumers. There are so many questions that they have and that they would like some help with. Or I'm hoping that within like maybe a couple of months, I'm involved in a project, I'm happy to say, in Warren, and we're starting a vertically integrated project there. And hopefully within like maybe the middle of next year, we'll have a space where we can, again, invite people to come inside and learn about this plant and learn how to do this medicinally. So I would say keep the video short, but if you are able to talk to people on a one-to-one basis, that's huge and that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm going to take a totally different angle here, which is to say, don't worry about creating that media. Instead, focus on training your own internal people. The amount of bad service or misinformation that gets transmitted in the cannabis industry is mind-boggling. And the problem with that is that for every one person you touch that has a bad experience, they don't talk about your service. They don't recommend what you do. They oftentimes fall into the abyss. And so what cannabis companies don't like to acknowledge, but is the truth, is that there's a lot of the times where customers are not having great experiences. And thus we're thinking we need to keep marketing outside of that pool of people. Where in opposition, what I would say is the companies that have the best training internally, that have really got well-trained people that are skilled and talented, know their stuff, can guide people to the right products, can speak the language well, they'll deliver an exceptional customer experience. Those people will then go and talk about it in way greater capacities than a generic online video would. And so I would say the greatest marketing tool that cannabis companies have, and I just wish they put more emphasis on it, is training your people internally, because a really standout wow-like customer experience from a cannabis company will go way farther than a snappy video online, that touches on a few topics. So train your people if you want to increase your marketing spend.
I love that. Thank you, you two. And then the last question, Hunter, somebody in the chat wanted to know if you could kind of jump in very quickly to some interesting and innovative things you guys are working on in your lab right now.
Yeah, with pleasure, certainly. One of my favorite things that we're working on right now, and Chris Ramos briefly mentioned this earlier, is the nano-emulsion technology. So THC being a fat-soluble compound, edibles have been kind of a hit or miss thing for a lot of people, and it's very hard to, as a new patient, understand how that's going to impact you and what you should expect from it. Nano-emulsions allow a fat-soluble molecule to become water-soluble. So it allows it to function just like any other medication you would normally take, with very, very rapid onset times, very defined curves in terms of onset. So that technology, I think, is definitely the future of both medicinal and adult use cannabis, in that it opens the doors to so many other kinds of products, be it infused beverages or tablets that are very specifically targeting certain ailments or effects for people. I think that cannabis will evolve into a much more mainstream in a sense, but also we're working on a lot of things that are designed to provide a very specific experience. So really targeted products that give you exactly what you expect them to every single time and give you the relief you are looking for, no matter what that is. So always looking for ways to improve the end user's experience with Redbud Roots products.
Awesome. Hunter, Max, Q, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Well, I thought that was absolutely amazing. I want to do another huge thank you to Q, Max, Hunter, Robin, Director Brisbo, of course, Bob, Patrick, Chris, and my co-host, Gus. And many of the panelists that you heard today are actually featured on our podcast called Everything is Marketing. So if you want to go back and listen to those, I would love for you to do those. But Gus, this afternoon was incredible.
Yes, it was very enjoyable. We talked to a lot of people who know a lot about the industry and where it's headed. So I personally would like to say thank you to them. Thank you to Director Brisbo. Thank you to everybody who participated, and especially those who posed some good questions.
Absolutely. So thank you to all of you who have joined us today. And another big thanks to our presenting sponsors, Select, to our gold sponsor, Northern Michigan University and Redbud Roots, our copper sponsors, Cannabis Council, DA Advisory Group, the Business Law Group, Med Farms, Bates Architecture, Continental Companies, and Native Michigan Remedies. That's a wrap, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this as much as we did putting it on for you. Have an absolutely amazing afternoon. And I think it was Patrick who said this. If not, it was Bob. Connect with the people that are on this call today, because this network is extremely valuable. So have a wonderful day. Gus, be well, my friend.
You too. Bye, everybody. Thank you.